On the night of June 15, 2022, the quiet suburb of Oak Grove, located 30 miles south of Chicago, was awakened by the piercing howl of fire sirens. The tranquility of this respectable neighborhood, known for its manicured lawns and friendly neighbors, was shattered by a tragedy that shook not only the local community, but the entire country. The Anderson family home, which had stood on Maple Street for more than 2 decades, was engulfed in flames. That night was the beginning of a complex investigation that uncovered the dark side of a seemingly perfect family life and led to a shocking revelation. Their own son was behind the Anderson couple's deaths. James and Linda Anderson moved to Oak Grove in 2000, shortly after the birth of their only son, Michael. James, a 48-year-old financial analyst, worked at a prestigious firm in downtown Chicago. His career was on the upswing, and colleagues described him as a hard-working and ambitious professional. Linda, 45, was an English teacher at a local high school. Her students and colleagues valued her for her dedication to her work and her ability to find an approach to the most challenging teenagers. Michael was 17 years old at the time of the tragedy. He was in his senior year at the same school where his mother taught. Outwardly, Michael seemed to be an ordinary teenager. Average grades, a passion for computer games, a small circle of friends. However, as it later turned out, behind this facade hid serious problems. Neighbors described the Andersons as the perfect family. Their house was always immaculately maintained, and they themselves regularly participated in the social life of the neighborhood. James was a member of the local golf club, and Linda organized an annual charity book festival. Michael was often seen helping neighbors with snow removal in the winter or mowing lawns in the summer. However, the outward prosperity hid deep family problems. The family's financial situation was not as stable as it seemed to those around them. James had made a series of unsuccessful investments several years ago, which led to significant debts. Fear of losing his social status forced him to hide these problems from his wife and son, taking out more and more loans to maintain his usual lifestyle. Linda, immersed in her work and social activities, did not notice her husband's growing tension. Her relationship with Michael was also becoming increasingly strained. As his teacher, she imposed high demands on her son, which caused the teenager a sense of constant pressure and inferiority. Michael, in turn, became increasingly withdrawn. His grades began to fall, and his behavior became increasingly defiant. Teachers noted his tendency toward aggressive outbursts and conflicts with classmates. However, this information did not get out of the school, largely due to the influence of Linda, who tried to protect the family's reputation. A few months before the tragedy, the situation in the family escalated. James began abusing alcohol in an attempt to cope with the stress of financial problems. Linda, noticing changes in her husband's behavior, became more irritable and demanding. Michael, finding himself between 2 fires, increasingly missed school and disappeared from home for long periods of time. None of the neighbors or acquaintances of the family did not suspect the depth of the problems that tore the Andersons from within. Outwardly, they continued to maintain the image of a well-to-do family, attending community events and hosting annual barbecues for neighbors. This double life created additional tensions that eventually led to a tragic denouement. In this way, the Anderson family represented a classic example of how the facade of outward prosperity can hide serious problems. Financial difficulties, emotional alienation, and an inability to openly discuss problems created an explosive situation that eventually led to a horrific tragedy that shook all of Oak Grove. On the night of June 15, 2022, residents of Maple Street were awakened by the pungent smell of smoke and bright flashes of flame coming from the Anderson home. The first to raise the alarm was a neighbor, Robert Thompson, who was walking his dog around 11:30 p.m. He immediately called the fire department and attempted to reach the occupants of the burning home. At 11:37 p.m., the first fire brigade arrived on the scene. By this time, the flames had already engulfed most of the first floor and began to spread to the second floor. Firefighters immediately began extinguishing, while trying to get inside to search for possible victims. At 23:45, additional fire crews and an ambulance crew arrived on the scene. Neighbors who ran outside told firefighters that 3 people were supposed to be in the house, the Anderson couple and their son Michael. By midnight, firefighters were able to enter the second floor through a bedroom window. There they discovered the bodies of James and Linda Anderson. Despite the immediately initiated resuscitation measures, it was not possible to save the spouses. Doctors of the ambulance stated the death of both of them from carbon monoxide poisoning. Firefighters continued to search for Michael, but could not find him in the house. At this time, the first police patrols began to arrive at the scene, which cordoned off the area and began interviewing neighbors. At 0:30, the fire was contained, but firefighters continued to drench the structure to prevent reignition. By this time, investigators from the Arson Investigation Unit had arrived on the scene. At around 1 o'clock, Michael Anderson was spotted in the crowd of onlookers. He appeared shaken and disoriented. Police officers immediately took him aside for questioning. Michael reported that he had gone out for a walk after an argument with his parents, and when he returned he found the house on fire. By 0200 hours, the fire was completely extinguished. Investigators began an initial examination of the scene. Already at this stage, they noted several suspicious details that pointed to possible arson. First, the fire spread unusually fast for an accidental fire. Secondly, there were traces of flammable liquid in several places on the first floor. Third, the front door was locked from the inside, which would have made it difficult for the occupants to evacuate in the event of a fire. By the morning of June 15th, the preliminary conclusion of fire inspectors was that the cause of the fire was most likely deliberate arson. This conclusion was based on the evidence found and the pattern of fire spread. The bodies of James and Linda Anderson were sent for forensic examination to determine the exact cause of death and to identify possible signs of violence prior to the fire. Michael Anderson was temporarily placed in the care of his aunt, Linda's sister, who lives in a neighboring town. Police put the house under surveillance and began preparations for a more thorough investigation. News of the tragedy spread quickly throughout Oak Grove. Residents were shocked by what had happened. Many could not believe that such a horrific crime could have occurred in their quiet neighborhood. Local authorities organized an emergency meeting of residents to reassure the public and urge them to cooperate with the investigation. Thus ended that fateful night that forever changed the lives of not only the Anderson family, but the entire Oak Grove community. The investigation was just beginning, and no one had any idea what shocking revelations it would bring. On the morning of June 16, 2022, 24 hours after the tragic fire at the Anderson home, the Oak Grove Police Department held an emergency meeting. Police Chief Michael Donovan appointed a special investigative team to look into the high-profile case. The team was headed by experienced Detective John Harris, known for his methodical nature and attention to detail. The team also included arson expert Sarah Chun, forensic scientist Alex Rodriguez, and specialist in working with teenagers Emily Taylor. Each team member was assigned specific tasks. Detective Harris began by re-examining the scene. Although the fire inspectors had already conducted an initial analysis, Harris wanted to personally verify every detail. He methodically examined every room of the burned house, paying attention to the slightest inconsistencies. During the inspection, new evidence was uncovered. In the basement of the house, they found an empty gasoline canister hidden behind old boxes. Partial fingerprints were found on the canister. They also found charred remnants of rags soaked in a flammable substance in the garage. Sarah Chun, after examining the pattern of fire spread and the evidence found, confirmed the initial conclusion of arson. She noted that the fire was deliberately set in multiple locations on the first floor, which explained its rapid spread. Alex Rodriguez set about analyzing fingerprints from the canister and other items found at the scene. He also began examining DNA samples collected from various surfaces in the house. Emily Taylor began gathering information on Michael Anderson. She contacted his school, interviewed teachers and classmates in an attempt to build a psychological profile of the teenager and understand his relationship with his parents. In parallel with the work at the crime scene, Detective Harris organized a large-scale witness interview. All neighbors of the Andersons were interviewed, as well as random passers-by who happened to be in the area on the night of the fire. Particular attention was paid to the testimony of Robert Thompson, the neighbor who first noticed the fire. Thompson testified that about an hour before the fire, he heard a loud argument coming from the Anderson home. He said this was unusual, as the family had always given the impression of being very quiet and reserved. Another neighbor, Mary Johnson, reported seeing Michael walking quickly away from the house about a half hour before the fire started. She noted that the teen appeared agitated and was constantly looking around. Detective Harris also interviewed James Anderson's co-workers at the financial firm. It turned out that James had been particularly stressed in recent months and had made several serious work errors. His supervisor hinted at James' possible dismissal in the near future. Linda's co-workers at the school described the growing tension between her and her son. Several teachers noted that Michael had recently become more withdrawn and aggressive, especially when interacting with his mother. As information was gathered, investigators began to form a more complete picture of the events leading up to the tragedy. It became obvious that behind the facade of a prosperous family there were serious problems. By the end of the first week of the investigation team had its first serious suspicions. Evidence and witness statements indicated that the arson could have been committed by someone familiar with the house and the family's routines. Detective Harris made the decision to conduct a more detailed interview with Michael Anderson. The teenager was still in the care of his aunt, and investigators hoped that in a calmer environment he would be able to tell more about the events of that fateful night. Thus ended the first week of the investigation, which brought more questions than answers. The investigation team realized that they had a long and complicated process ahead of them to unravel all the mysteries of this tragic incident. On the 10th day of the investigation, there was an unexpected twist that dramatically changed the course of the case. Criminalist Alex Rodriguez received the results of the analysis of fingerprints found on the canister from the basement. To everyone's surprise, the prints belonged to Michael Anderson. Detective Harris immediately called an emergency meeting of the investigation team. This discovery required a review of all available evidence and testimony. Michael was now transformed from a potential witness to a prime suspect. At the same time, Sarah Chun completed her detailed analysis of the fire. She submitted a detailed report confirming that the fire was intentional. Moreover, the pattern of fire spread indicated that the arsonist was well aware of the layout of the house and had deliberately blocked escape routes. Emily Taylor, an adolescent caseworker, provided a psychological profile of Michael. According to her report, the teen showed signs of severe emotional distress and repressed aggression. Teachers and classmates noted his increasing isolation and outbursts of anger in the final months before the tragedy. Detective Harris decided to dig deeper into the Anderson family's financial situation. He requested a detailed analysis of their bank accounts and credit history. The results were shocking. Turned out that James Anderson was deep in debt. He had taken out several large loans that even his wife didn't know about. What's more, he was found to have attempted to take out a large life insurance policy just a month before the fire. This information led investigators to take a new look at the motives behind the crime. There was a theory that James could have organized the arson himself to obtain insurance, but something went wrong. However, this theory did not explain the presence of Michael's fingerprints on the gasoline can. In the second week of the investigation, Detective Harris decided to re-interview Michael Anderson. This time, the interview took place in a more formal setting, in the presence of the teen's attorney. Michael appeared nervous and depressed. When presented with evidence linking him to the canister, he initially denied involvement. However, under the pressure of the evidence, his version of events began to fall apart. After several hours of intense interrogation, Michael suddenly cried and began to talk. He admitted that he did take the gasoline can from the garage, but claimed that it was at the request of his father. According to Michael, James had asked him to bring the canister into the house the night before the fire, but did not explain why he needed it. This confession opened a new line of inquiry. Now investigators had to figure out whether Michael's involvement in the arson was accidental or whether he knowingly participated in the crime. Detective Harris decided to check Michael's alibi for the night of the fire. The teenager claimed that he left home after an argument with his parents and was walking around the neighborhood. However, Surveillance cameras from neighboring houses did not record his departure at the specified time. In addition, analysis of Michael's phone records revealed a series of calls from an unknown number in the days before the fire. These calls stopped immediately after the tragedy. By the end of the second week of the investigation team had more questions than answers. It was clear that Michael was involved in some way, but the extent of his involvement remained unclear. James Anderson's financial problems were adding another layer of complexity to the case. Detective Harris realized that they were on the verge of uncovering the shocking truth about what had really happened that fateful night at the Anderson family home. With new evidence pointing to Michael Anderson's involvement in the tragedy, the investigation team focused on scrutinizing the teenager's personality. Detective Harris assigned Emily Taylor to conduct an in-depth analysis of Michael's psychological state and his relationship with his parents. Emily began by reviewing Michael's school records. It turned out that over the past year his grades had dropped dramatically. Teachers noted that the previously diligent student began to skip classes, did not do his homework, and conflicted with classmates. Michael's relationship with his mother, who taught at the same school, was particularly strained. An interview with the school psychologist revealed an even more disturbing picture. It turned out that Michael had sought help a month before the fire, complaining of severe stress and suicidal thoughts. The psychologist recommended that the parents see a specialist, but it is not known whether they followed this advice. Detective Harris personally interviewed Michael's closest friends. One of them, Jason Turner, reluctantly admitted that Michael had spoken several times about wanting to end it all and start a new life. Jason did not pay attention to these words, writing them off as teenage maximalism. In parallel, criminalist Alex Rodriguez analyzed Michael's computer and smartphone. The history of internet searches showed that the teenager was interested in arson methods, the effect of fire on the human body, and ways to cover up the traces of the crime. Those searches began about 2 weeks before the tragedy. Sarah Chun, an arson expert, conducted an investigative experiment recreating the conditions of the fire at the Anderson home. The results showed that carrying out the arson required knowledge and physical strength that a 17-year-old could well have possessed. Detective Harris decided to conduct another interrogation of Michael, this time using psychological pressure tactics. Under the onslaught of evidence and contradictions in his own testimony, Michael began to get confused. He denied his involvement, then said that he acted on the orders of his father, then hinted at some unknown accomplice. During the interrogation, Michael suddenly mentioned voices in his head, which allegedly ordered him to commit arson. This statement led investigators to wonder about the teenager's possible mental problems. Emily Taylor organized a psychiatric evaluation of Michael. The results were mixed. Although no obvious signs of psychosis were found, experts noted in the teenager signs of major depression and borderline personality disorder. Analysis of Michael's social networks, conducted by a team of cybercriminals, revealed his participation in online forums devoted to the topics of suicide and mass murder. In his posts, Michael often expressed feelings of hopelessness and anger towards his parents and society in general. Detective Harris also noticed Michael's strange behavior immediately after the fire. Witnesses noted his unusual calmness and detachment. He showed no obvious signs of grief, which alarmed even his aunt, with whom he was temporarily staying. By the end of the third week of the investigation team had a fairly clear picture of Michael Anderson's personality. They saw the image of a deeply traumatized teenager suffering from emotional problems and conflicts with his parents. However, a key question remained unanswered. Was Michael really capable of planning and carrying out the murder of his own parents in cold blood? Detective Harris realized that they were close to a clue, but irrefutable evidence was needed to bring charges. He decided to once again carefully analyze all the collected evidence and prepare for the crucial interrogation of Michael Anderson. In the fourth week of the investigation, Detective Harris focused on uncovering possible motives for the crime. He understood that to successfully close the case, it was crucial not only to prove Michael's involvement in the arson but also to establish what had driven the teenager to commit such a horrifying act. Harris began by re-examining the Anderson family's financial situation. A deeper review of bank accounts and credit histories revealed shocking details. It turned out that James Anderson wasn't just drowning in debt, he was on the verge of bankruptcy. Over the past 2 years, he had taken out several large loans that he was unable to repay. Furthermore, traces of illegal financial activity suggested possible fraud. It appeared that Linda Anderson was unaware of the extent of her husband's financial troubles. However, a week before the tragedy, she withdrew a significant amount of cash from her personal account. This raised suspicions among the investigators. Had Linda discovered her husband's schemes and planned to leave him? Emily Taylor conducted a series of interviews with close friends of the Anderson family. A picture of a deep family crisis slowly began to emerge. Friends spoke of frequent arguments between the couple in recent months and growing estrangement between Michael and his parents. Several mentioned that Linda had hinted at the possibility of divorce. Harris paid special attention to studying Michael's relationship with his parents. An analysis of the teenager's social media correspondence revealed the depth of his resentment and anger. In private messages to friends, Michael complained about constant pressure from his mother, her high expectations, and public criticism. He described his father as distant and indifferent, incapable of protecting him from his mother's demands. The detective also discovered that, a month before the fire, Michael had tried to enroll in a military academy in another state. His application was rejected due to low grades and a negative recommendation from the school psychologist. This may have been the final straw, shattering the teenager's hopes of escaping his family. Sarah Chun, after analyzing the arson pattern, concluded that the perpetrator acted with particular cruelty. The fire was set in a way that blocked escape routes as quickly as possible, indicating the arsonist's strong negative emotions toward the victims. Alex Rodriguez found an encrypted diary on Michael's computer. After decrypting it, it became clear that the teenager had been planning a grand finale for several months. In his writings, he expressed hatred toward his parents, blaming them for his failures and unhappiness. Emily Taylor, based on all the collected data, compiled a psychological profile of Michael. In her opinion, the teenager was in a state of severe depression, worsened by a sense of hopelessness and anger. She suggested that Michael might have viewed the murder of his parents as the only way to free himself from their control and start a new life. Detective Harris also noted Michael's strange behavior in the days leading up to the fire. Several witnesses remarked that the teenager seemed unusually calm and even at peace, as if he had made an important decision. By the end of the 4th week of the investigation, the team had developed the following theory of the crime's motive. Michael, in a deep emotional crisis, saw the murder of his parents as the only way out of his situation. His father's financial troubles and the potential divorce of his parents may have acted as the catalyst, pushing the teenager to act. Harris understood that this theory explained many aspects of the case, but to confirm it, they needed a confession from Michael himself. The detective decided to conduct a final, decisive interrogation of the suspect, hoping that under the weight of the evidence and psychological pressure, Michael would finally reveal the full truth about the tragic events of that night. In the 5th week of the investigation, Detective Harris decided to conduct a crucial interrogation of Michael Anderson. He meticulously prepared, gathering all the available evidence and witness statements. The interrogation was scheduled for Monday morning in a specially equipped room at the police station. Michael arrived with his attorney, looking exhausted and nervous. Detective Harris began with general questions, gradually steering the conversation toward the events of the night of the fire. He methodically presented the evidence: fingerprints on the gas can, surveillance footage, and the inconsistencies in Michael's testimony. For the first 2 hours of the interrogation, Michael remained firm, denying any involvement in the crime. However, when Harris presented the decrypted version of his personal diary, the teenager noticeably paled. The detective read aloud several particularly emotional passages, where Michael expressed hatred toward his parents and a desire to end it all. At that moment, Emily Taylor, who was present during the interrogation, noticed that Michael was showing signs of severe emotional stress. She suggested taking a break, but Harris, sensing they were close to a breakthrough, decided to press on. The detective shifted the conversation to the family's financial problems and the possibility of his parents divorcing. He asked Michael if he knew about his father's dire situation and his mother's plans to leave the family. The question seemed to catch the teenager off guard. Suddenly, Michael broke down in tears. Through sobs, he began to speak, at first incoherently, then more clearly. He confessed to starting the fire but claimed he never intended to kill his parents. According to him, he just wanted to scare them, to make them realize how much they had ruined his life. Michael recounted that, on the night of the fire, he overheard his parents arguing. His father admitted to his mother about his financial fraud, and his mother declared her intention to leave and take Michael with her. The teenager felt like he was losing control of his life and decided to act. He took a gas can from the garage and poured gasoline on the first floor of the house. Michael had planned to set the house on fire and, heroically, save his parents, hoping that the event would bring the family together. But something went wrong. The fire spread faster than he had expected. When Michael realized he couldn't control the flames, he panicked and ran away. Michael's confession was recorded on video. Satisfied with the statements, Detective Harris formally announced that Michael Anderson was under arrest on suspicion of arson and involuntary manslaughter of 2 people. After the arrest, Michael was taken to a juvenile detention center. Given the severity of the crime and the teenager's psychological state, the court ordered a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation. News of Michael Anderson's arrest quickly spread through Oak Grove, shocking and bewildering the local residents. Many couldn't believe that a quiet teenager from a well-to-do family could commit such a horrific crime. Reflecting on the investigation, Detective Harris noted that this case was one of the most challenging of his career. It revealed how deep problems could be hidden behind a facade of normalcy and how important it is to recognize warning signs in a teenager's behavior before tragedy strikes. Thus, the investigation into the Anderson family tragedy concluded, leaving many questions about the nature of family dynamics, teenage psychology, and parental responsibility for the emotional well-being of their children. The trial of Michael Anderson began 3 months after his arrest. By that time, the case had gained widespread attention, attracting interest from not only local but also national media. Oak Grove became the center of a public discussion on issues of teenage violence and family dynamics. The preparation for the trial was long and thorough. The prosecution, led by experienced District Attorney Sarah Lang, compiled a substantial amount of evidence. They aimed for a conviction on charges of arson and involuntary manslaughter. Michael's defense was taken up by Jonathan Green, a well-known attorney specializing in juvenile cases. His strategy focused on highlighting the teenager's psychological issues and the toxic family environment that contributed to the tragedy. The courtroom sessions were held in an atmosphere of heightened public attention. The courtroom was packed with journalists and local residents eager to hear the details of this shocking case. Prosecutor Lang methodically presented evidence of Michael's guilt. She called Detective Harris, arson experts, forensic specialists, and psychologists to the stand. The testimony of the neighbors, who described how quickly the fire spread and how desperately James and Linda Anderson tried to escape, had a strong impact on the jury. Defense Attorney Green, in turn, concentrated on exposing the Andersons' troubled family dynamics. He called witnesses who spoke of James's financial struggles, the tense relationship between Michael and his mother, and signs of depression in the teenager that had been ignored by his parents. The key moment of the trial was Michael's own testimony. The teenager, looking worn out and defeated, recounted the events of that night in detail. He reiterated that he never intended to kill his parents, only to scare them. With tears in his eyes, Michael expressed deep remorse and spoke about how he regrets his actions every single day. A psychiatric evaluation presented in court confirmed that Michael suffered from severe emotional issues. The experts diagnosed him with depressive disorder and borderline personality traits. However, they also concluded that he was legally sane at the time of the crime and understood the potential consequences of his actions. After 2 weeks of hearings, the case was handed over to the jury for deliberation. Their discussions lasted nearly a full day, reflecting the complexity of the decision. Finally, the verdict was announced. The jury found Michael Anderson guilty of involuntary manslaughter of both parents and arson. However, They also recommended that the court take into account mitigating circumstances when determining his sentence. Judge Martin Caldwell, known for his balanced approach to juvenile cases, delivered the sentence a week after the jury's decision. Michael was sentenced to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Additionally, the judge mandated that Michael undergo a mandatory psychological rehabilitation program. The sentencing sparked mixed reactions from the public. Many believed the punishment was too lenient, given the severity of the crime. Others argued that the justice system should focus on rehabilitating young offenders rather than simply punishing them. The case of Michael Anderson became a catalyst for discussions on several important social issues. Support programs for troubled teens began to emerge in Oak Grove and other cities across the country. Schools increased their attention to signs of emotional distress in students. The tragedy of the Anderson family left a lasting impact on the residents of Oak Grove, serving as a reminder of the importance of recognizing problems early and providing help to those who need it most. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories that are coming out every day.